Hello everyone, welcome to a new video. This is Ankit Mittal and this is the part 2 of supply chain levels for software artifacts. So in my previous video, we have discussed about what is SLSA and we saw the supply chain problem as well. And we have gone through this diagram where we saw the various threats which are applicable in the software development and how these can be affecting your software which you are delivering. So let's go to the assurances because SLSA provides you a certain levels. So there are basically 4 levels to which the SLSA provides you the assurance. Now, if you are implementing the SLSA practices, SLSA levels are like a common language to talk about how to secure your software. Basically, your supply chains and their component parts really are. And from the source to system, the level basically for the blend together in the industry and the best practices for the compliance level of increasing the assurances. So these looks at the build sources dependencies in open source or the commercial software. So basically these SLSA are applicable for most of your stages, whether it's the builds that you are going to perform. So your CI server will be coming into it, the build tool that you are considering, that will also be a part of it. Sources, if you are downloading some dependencies and that from the centralized repository, which might you think that they are not under your control, but then SLSA also has the assurances for that as well, and how you can optimize that and check for the security issues and on those ends as well. And it is working both for the open source as well as the commercial software developments. So anyone who is involved into this can fully utilize it. One such example from the open source development is the Kubernetes. The Kubernetes as an whole software, they have implemented the SLSA into the software development, and this actually helps the Kubernetes to consider the security at the very base of it. And that is why large number of organizations does prefer the Kubernetes. Now, starting with easy and basic steps at the lower levels to build up and protect against the advanced threat later. So it basically considers everything from the software perspective, whether it's like very basic threats, which it depends upon your processes, to very sophisticated and complicated attacks, which are performed at the advanced threats level. So bringing the SLSA into your work means you are going to prioritize, you are going to practically measure to prevent the unauthorized modification of your code, which is of the prime aspect for any software provider whose product is being used, going to be used on a very large scale and deployed across large organizations, and who are having a large number of clients. So this can be a B2B as well as a B2C model, and both of them will be can consider the SLSA, and a plan to harden the security over time. So this is very important that you keep on improving on your security part. So let's consider this levels in more detail. So there are basically 4 different levels. So if you see, the level 1 is the easy to adopt, giving you supply chain visibility and being able to generate the provenance. So this is the very first level of the SLSA, where you are going to adopt it, you are going to make it visible in your supply chain, and you are able to generate the provenance. The second part is you are going to protect your software against the tampering. This is very critical for any software provider, because even a very small piece of code which you might not be aware of, if this has been inserted, that can cause a very big issues at a later point in time when large number of customers are using it. And adds minimal build integrity guarantees, and this is also going to have the integrity guarantee. So there are a number of steps that you will have to perform. We will be discussing about them as well later in the slide. So next is the level 3 attacks. These are basically harden the infrastructure against the attacks, more trust integrated into the complex system. So you will have to follow the best practices, a lot of when you are going to implement this and integrate into your infrastructure. So again, hardening of the infrastructure is very important, because your machines, if on which these softwares are basically running, if they are themselves having the vulnerabilities, then definitely your software will be exploited because of that. So that also becomes a part of within the level 3. Next is level 4. So highest assurances of the build integrity and measures of dependency management in place. So these are basically the highest level of the assurances that the SLSA provides you. So if you must be considering who is SLSA for. So these are basically for the developers, these are for the businesses, the enterprises. So SLSA is basically an industry standard for a recognizable and agreed upon levels for the protection and the compliances of the software. It is adaptable. It has been designed with a wider security ecosystem in the mind for anyone to adopt. That could be users requiring the software that rely on the SLSA level, or an open source software project protecting its user from the SLSA compliant infrastructure, or an enterprise using the SLSA as guidelines, guiding principles to harden their own internal supply chains, requiring that dependencies are SLSA compliant too. So these are the where the SLSA can be implemented, and these organizations, the businesses, the enterprises, the open source developers, the developers themselves, and any organization who is into the software development can implement the SLSA and can get benefit from the security that the SLSA basically provides. So if we look at the summary of the level, so basically if you, the very first one is that the documentation of the build process. So example here would be unsigned provenance. So next is that you are going to provide the temper resistance of the build services. Now, again, this can be into the hosted and source and build signed provenance. Then there is extra resistance to specific threats, like the security controls on your host, non-falsifiable provenance, and the highest level of the confidence of trust, that is a two-party review and hermetic build. So we are going to discuss about them one by one now. So let's start with the level 1. The level 1 basically is the build process must be fully scripted, automated, and generated provenance. So this basically means that you cannot go ahead with the older way where you are logging onto the system, performing a batch of commands. Later, it was adopted in the form of an documentation, but then again, creating these documents can be easily outdated, and there are no checks, right? So if a human intervention is there, then you cannot really say that entire process is being compliant and exactly the steps were followed in the build part. So you need to have the fully automated builds, and they should be able to generate the provenance as well. Now, what is provenance? Provenance is basically the metadata about how the artifact was built, including what process did you follow, the top level source that you followed, and the dependencies, because these are the things which are actually going to be creating your builds, right? So knowing the provenance allows the software consumers to make the risk-based security decisions. Now, provenance at SLSA 1 does not protect you against the tampering, but it offers you the basic level of code source integration, identification, and can aid in the vulnerability management. So these are basically the things which you are going to get at the level 1. At least you will be getting the vulnerability management and how you can manage the vulnerabilities inside your code. Obviously, this is not going to protect you entirely from the tampering, which is of the prime aspect within the software development, and the basic level of the code source identification will also be there. Next is level 2, where it requires using the version control and a hosted build service that generates the authenticated provenance. So these additional requirements give the consumer greater confidence in the origin of the software. And at this level, the provenance prevents the tampering to the extent that the build service is trusted. So this is going to provide you a level of provenance against the tampering, and it's going to help you to the extent of build services trusted. SLSA 2 is provide an easy upgrade part to SLSA 3. So you have to make sure that when you are doing the builds, you are using the version control system, like at least the Git and the hosted build services that generates the authenticated provenance. So again, this is where you will be having the authentication in place, so some outsiders cannot make any changes. Only the persons who are authenticated, who are authorized, they would be able to generate such build. So this provides you at least a level of provenance. Next is the source and the build platform meets the specific standards to guarantee the auditability of the source and integrity of the provenance respectively. Now, this is the most important one, because here you are envision an accreditation process where the auditors certify that the platforms meets the requirement which the consumers can rely on. And these auditors can be your internal auditing team. You can also go for an external audits to get the more consumer trust that the system that they through which the software is getting delivered, it is auditable. All the artifacts are consumed, the best practices of the security is being followed, and you are having everything, all the documentation in process, will laid out processes. You are having the process of making the production changes. All of them are like built into your system, and you are having a full integrity into your system. So SLSA provides much stronger protection against the tampering at the earlier level by preventing the specific classes of threats such as cross-build contamination. So this is again very important, because now the system is under the audit perspective, right? Anyone can audit it, so, provided from your organization, and they can take the corrective measures. This is how you are going to build the reliability into your system and the security. So this will make your process more refined. It will help from the security part as well. And the last level is the level 4, where it requires a 2% review for all the changes and a hermetic and reproducible build process. So what this means is that 2% should be in reviewing the industry in the best practice for catching the mistakes and deterring the bad behavior. Now, this is where the initial pushes comes into the picture. So when anyone is pushing it, then if there are two people who are looking at the same thing before merging the code, so again, this is going to actually help in catching the mistakes earlier and prevent the bad behavior either into the software or even into the infrastructure with the infrastructure as code practices. So hermetic builds guarantee that the provenance list of the dependencies is complete. Reproducible builds are there, right? Though not strictly required, but provide many auditability and the reliability benefits when you are having the reproducible builds, and you can actually produce exactly the same builds when you are going to run your automated systems, which are going to generate exactly the same builds because of the laid out process and the policies into the code and the overall process that you have set up. So overall, SLSA 4 gives the consumers the highest degree of the confidence that the software has not been tampered with. This is something which the organization is shipping to the client, and this is what they are getting actually. So this is the level 4 of the SLSA. Now, that's all that we are going to cover in this video, but in our next video we will be reviewing the threats in more details, and we are going to see how these 4 levels are able to basically prevent those threats. So we are going to discuss about the threats in our next video, and I'm going to give you more insights, basically how each of the levels is able to prevent if you are following the SLSA practices for them. And we are going to see them from an architecture point of view, so that it basically you are able to figure out at what stages what attacks can be happening and how the SLSA can protect your software from that. So that's all for this video. If you have not subscribed to our channel, please do subscribe to our channel, and so that you can get the videos directly as soon as we release it. So that's all. I'm Ankit Mittal signing off. Thank you.